It's also worth mentioning really that what makes a diagnosis strong is distinct symptoms, a clear impairment, consistent course over time, things like that, cross-cultural recognition to some extent, biological correlates, and the more of those you have, I suppose, the more confidence you've got that you're dealing with a real thing, a real disease, rather than arbitrary category. And schizophrenia, for example, does reasonably well on that scale. So the symptoms are distinctive, auditory hallucinations, delusions, thought disorder, so on. You don't need a questionnaire to identify someone hearing voices, or believing MI5 as, put a transmitter in their teeth or something. The impairment's pretty catastrophic and it's pretty observable. Hospitalization, inability to function, psychosis, homelessness, suicide risk. You're arguably not getting anything close to those things with ADHD. There are also decades of evidence showing that there's genetic risk and so on to schizophrenia, and structural brain differences at a group level. Not to mention dopamine abnormalities and other things. No single brain scan can diagnose schizophrenia, of course, but it leaves a lot of fingerprints. Addiction, probably even stronger actually. So addiction's got tolerance, withdrawal, craving, compulsivity of use, continued use despite harm, sort of objective behavioral outcomes as well, overdoses, arrests, job loss, relationship breakdown, physical dependence. Now, I know a lot of people attribute their relationship breakdown to their ADHD, but come on. I left him because he never could finish a book, versus I left him because he kept overdosing on crack and having a heart attack. It's pretty obvious when a heroin addict is in severe withdrawal. You don't need to score highly on a questionnaire for that. PTSD also has pretty good, does pretty well on this. You can map out the nightmares, flashbacks, avoidance, hypervigilance, and I would make the point that you can map those things out for PTSD proper with a lot more veracity than you can the nonsense items that you will find on the questionnaires for complex trauma and small t trauma, and these new sort of Gabor Mate-led traumas, Bessel van der Kolk's version of trauma, the modern fashionable version of trauma. Their questionnaires and symptomology and tick list is every bit as frivolous as the ADHD questionnaire-led disease model. It's laughable, but when you look at the PTSD, what's required for PTSD is significant and not difficult to mistake. Right? You can see when someone's being hypervigilant or exaggerated kind of startle response. It's like watching somebody who's psychotic. It's really easy to see there's something really wrong with them. All right. Depression, again, it's probably actually in a way doesn't do so well on this system, but again, anyone who's had it will tell you, if you're really, really honest with yourself, and you've had proper major depression, and you also think you've had ADHD, think about how you felt when you had the two things. The depression is absolutely unmistakable. It's physical, it's physiological, it's brutal. You know when it comes on. It's like some sort of weird illness or being, I don't know if you've ever had a really, really horrible injury or something. It feels a particular way, right? And big, proper black dog depression, when it comes on you, it's got a feeling, it's got a terrifying kind of feeling that's unmistakable. And ADHD is far more amorphous than that. If you ask people to describe it, what they are describing really is something everybody will know. It's massive boredom, listlessness, a kind of discontentedness, or just a desire to get up and start doing stuff. It's normal. So ADHD is different. So the symptoms are inattentive, forgetful, restless, a bit impulsive, disorganized. In other words, things that people would have on a spectrum to some degree or other. These are normal human traits. Everybody exhibits them. The diagnostic question really is how much is too much, right? So the boundary is inherently subjective. So key distinction here would be schizophrenia might ask, is this person hearing voices? PTSD would ask, is this person having flashbacks? Addiction would ask, is this person compulsively consuming drugs despite harm? And ADHD might ask, how inattentive is inattentive? Doesn't really get you very far, does it? And that's because it's a completely different kind of a question. So the first three involve discrete phenomena, and the last one involves a dimensional personality trait. So how to think about this would be a height analogy. So a useful way to think about it would be schizophrenia is like pregnancy, right? You either have it or you don't. ADHD is like height. Everyone's somewhere on the spectrum, right? So if I were to distill, I think, Tamini's argument on the video, it would be something like this. Schizophrenia and addiction and PTSD describe distinct pathological states that most people can realize or recognize when they see them. ADHD describes a collection of common human traits whose boundaries are kind of decided by committees rather than discovered in nature, if you like. So imagine our previous point that ADHD is not very apparent in populations such as, for example, here's a good way of thinking about it. Addiction's not very, ADHD is not very apparent amongst the Inuit, right? But ADHD proponents, psychologists, would say, let me get my hands on the Inuit and I'll show you how much ADHD there is. Which is precisely my criticism, right? Yeah, I'm sure you would. I'm sure there'd be ADHD clinics, like poking up out of the icebergs, right? And loads of Inuit kids going around going, I've got ADHD, you know. Of course, if you landed, that is precisely what would happen. And that's my entire point, that it would require that kind of diagnostic intervention for ADHD to be discovered in the first place. Addiction, by contrast, like with the Inuit, like anybody else, does not require a clinician, a questionnaire, or a diagnostic framework to be visible, right? It announces itself through rather obvious behaviors. Right, so that's my, unfortunately, rather controversial takedown of ADHD. It's not intended to insult anybody. I just cannot go on in all good conscience with the way things are. And so I just had to say something. So there you are.